For all our lovely listeners, my name is Sasha. I'm one of the security sales engineers here at ConnectWise. So my job primarily is doing demonstrations of the solutions we have. Alongside that, we do a lot of webinars for end user kind of security awareness and risk management training as well. So we have a lot of solutions in the security stack. So my job is to make sure that I'm familiar with all these in case we need to do demonstrations for certain customers, if there's any sort of advice that we need to be able to provide, as well as education with those particular solutions too.
Awesome. Thank you. And so, if anyone doesn't know me, I came from an MSP before working at ConnectWise, and we used SIM as one of our products. So, we'll take that and talk about questions I literally had, and not just questions that I thought of after the fact. But this is going into the memory banks and thinking of, man, I had this question when I first started working with this product. So let's go down that road. And so we'll just start right off. One of the questions, especially with the current environment and state of the world, is that remote work is big. And I know when we were talking about and implementing SIM, one of the components is that network sensor, that device that looks at the network traffic coming from the switch or firewall or whatever. And my question is, with the advent of remote work, there are some environments that don't even really have corporate networks anymore, or if they do, they're very limited, and some people are working from home. So it's kind of a two-part question. One is the network sensor necessary in those environments? And if it's not, what are you giving up by not having that?
So that's a really good question and something that we're getting quite often and more of. So with, let's say, for example, customers that are no longer having local infrastructure, so we're kind of removing that virtual sensor or that physical sensor within the environment.
So it's kind of a nice to have. There's some extra stuff you can get if you have it. Don't necessarily need it, and you're not really losing much if you don't have it. So these
Yeah.
days, a lot of, maybe even most or almost all traffic is encrypted, right? Every website is HTTPS. And even if you have local applications, a lot of time you're just connecting back to a hosted instance of it back at the vendor. And so my question is, you talked about endpoint and you talked about integrations and SaaS integrations, but let's say you are monitoring with a network sensor, with the physical sensor, or even the virtual sensor in the cloud environments. How does that handle, or what are the implications of so much being encrypted? Are you still able to get information out of that sensor with all of the traffic encrypted by looking at things like source and destination? Or is it that it's less useful and more limited with all that encryption in place now?
So with encrypted traffic and SIEM solutions, this is not typically what a SIEM solution is there because of what we are effectively asking for. We are asking for content inspection if that's the case. So that's normally what a next-gen firewall or a proxy server would tend to do. So the SIEM will be there to actually collect security event-based logs from computers, local infrastructure, and the cloud, and collecting those logs to a centralized platform for analysis as well as auditing. So it's not designed to monitor the outbound, inbound traffic. That is more of a firewalls, a next-gen firewall as well, as it has the capability to decrypt traffic and complete content inspection and then re-encrypt it back out. So although you asked a good question, do we lose visibility? It's not something we're actually looking for within a SIEM anyway, in order to do that kind of inspection. So we can't see the content of a packet because we're not actually analyzing outbound traffic or inbound traffic. We're pulling security-based event logs from multiple locations and correlating that to a possible attack. Now, what we can see is the packet headers, okay, which is, we'll be able to identify if this is a malicious domain. For example, is this a domain in North Korea, which is a known threat actor group? Then we can go ahead and start flagging up alerts based on that as well. But primarily, the SIEM will not be there to do content inspection.
If I'm a ConnectWise partner and I have one of our MDR services like Sentinel One or Bitdefender, and I have the SOC service that's attached to it, if I add SIM to that and the SOC service around that, are the logs correlated? Are the analysts able to look at both my data from the EDR platform and combine it with the data from the SIM platform, or are they separate teams?
No, that's correct. It is an entire SOC team which has access to our EDR platforms as well as the SIEM as well, so we can start correlating logs. So having that MDI and SIEM with ConnectWise with the SOC team will, you get access to the entire SOC team, that 200-man team that we offer. So it's a large enough team which can switch between the two different solutions. So let's say you have a threat on an endpoint that has EDR, and our analysts have indicators that this threat has potentially laterally moved across the network. So our SOC team can also review the SIEM for visibility to check for any abnormal behavior, help us narrow down where the potential threat is. And the great thing about having the ConnectWise SOC is that you have access to those resources, such as the cyber research unit, such as the incident response team, so they can look to provide a more quality root cause analysis.
So let's say I'm using the ConnectWise SOC and there's something detected, there's an incident that occurred, and the ConnectWise SOC takes an action. What does that look like from my perspective? What happens next? Am I contacted? Is there an action that they take on my behalf? Does it depend on what type of thing was detected? What should I expect that interaction to look like?
That's a great question. So, what we aim to do with the SOC team, along with the SIEM as well, we're trying to reduce pressure from your team. We're trying to reduce that noise effectively, right? Because SIEM solutions are notorious for collecting a lot of logs, which can take a lot of time to process as well. So we'll identify what priority that particular event lands on. Let's say, for example, it's a P4. We would normally just go ahead and triage it. We will not go ahead and notify you about the P4 because, again, we're just trying to minimize that noise. It's a low priority. It's nothing really to be concerned about. Let's move up to, for example, priority one, the worst case scenario, right? So if it's a critical alert, we'll go ahead, identify what the issue is, go ahead and do everything we need to do within that 60-minute SLO that we provide. And then from there, we will email or contact you either by phone or again by email, and we'll reach out to you, kind of letting you know what's going on. Is there anything that you need to do from your side as well to go ahead and minimize that threat, reduce the threat as well? Most likely, there will be next steps for the SIEM solution, again, because the SIEM solution is a detection tool only, right? So we can't get access to your server in order to go ahead and roll back, for example. So we'll provide a list of next steps that needs to be done from your side, but we would already have done the triaging and analysis of what the exact threat is, how serious it is, and what needs to be done from your side, and assisting you along the way.
But if you're using the MDR service, there may be other steps that happen, such as initiating a rollback or isolating endpoints or that types of thing. So it's useful in combination with both services, in addition to just the detection capabilities of SIM.
Absolutely correct. Yep. So we'll have more resources in our inventory. So let's say, for example, we detected something on the scene, we can go ahead and cross-reference that on the MDR platform as well, or the EDR platform, should I say? And we'll go ahead and see if there's anything that we could do from that side as well. So more tools to play with.
So one of the big benefits of both SIM and MDR and the SOC is that you can identify things that are happening systemically. And so a good example is if there's a machine that is infected or has some kind of ransomware infection, you can use the imaging or the data that you have from all across the network to identify whether this is an isolated case or there's a threat actor pivoting between machines and accessing servers and things. Are there any other specific benefits that we should know about as far as having the SOC service in addition to just the SIM, right? You can buy just the SIM if you only need data collection or log retention, maybe for some compliance reasons, or if you have an in house SOC yourself. But what else are you getting by having the SOC service in addition to just the software?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So, along with what you receive with the SIEM and its own benefits as well. So, with the SOC team, with that co-managed side of the SIEM, you're going to be receiving kind of expertise, specialized resources as well. So, the SOC provides access to that dedicated team, analysts, engineers, the CRU as well, and obviously the IR team that you could be able to access. So, you have the 24/7 monitoring. So during the weekend, during nighttime, times where attacks normally will happen because attackers will do reconnaissance, find out when the businesses are active, when is the business more vulnerable, which is normally when no one's actually on the network able to detect if there's anything suspicious. So having that 24/7 monitoring is great. Advanced threat detection as well as analysis. You also get that threat hunting, so that proactive defense as well. that's coupled up with that CRU, and knowledge sharing as well as collaboration. Okay, so there's tons of resources that you'll be able to get with that SOC team, as well as that coupled up with the technology in order for that constant monitoring and activity logging.
Let's say that I've purchased SIM with the SOC, the co-managed SKU. Am I still able to go in and do my own threat hunting? Do I have full access to the data? Can I write my own queries and do my own reports, or am I limited to what the SOC can do? And I say that because I'm kind of an elastic nerd and I don't want to be like locked out of the control panel or console to be able to view things.
Now, that's a really good question. So you have the same access as what the SOC has access to regarding the solution. So the solution's effectively, the SOC team is going to be partnered with you. So the solution is effectively going to be shared between yourselves and what the SOC team is going to be using as well. So you have the same capabilities as what the tool can do for the SOC team. So you can go ahead and run your global searches, do your reporting, your Elastic searches as well. The same thing as what the SOC team can do as well. They would just be there as kind of like an added partner, an added set of eyes on that console.
So if I have SIM and I have Office 365 and I have some of the higher end Azure SKUs, things that detect impossible travel or malicious enterprise apps or risky sign-ins, are those the kinds of things that SIM will detect for me in those environments?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. So with the license that we have a minimum requirement of a P2 Azure license, and that's simply just because of the features we can utilize within that license. So again, with those kind of data that we'd be able to pull, such as impossible travel, certain users accessing certain files as well, we'll be able to gain that from the P2 license. So that's why we always recommend customers, onboarding customers, to have a minimum license of that, so we can be able to utilize all the features that the SIEM can be able to provide. And I guess while we're on the conversation of licenses, we have two models of how we are able to effectively bill or license customers, and that's per user or per IP. Majority of customers are happy and fine with per user, and I always like to use this as example as why per user is much more valuable than log ingestion, such as other competitors. Example, Fortinet. They currently use log ingestion in order to kind of understand and utilize how many logs and how we can bill our customers. So with CW SIEM, we effectively are able to go ahead and only bill per user and not bill per log ingestion, which for some customers are they understand if we go ahead and ingest more logs, their price is going to be larger, right, per month. So what does that tend to do for customers in a cybersecurity perspective? We are losing visibility because some
Right.
customers are reluctant of going ahead and trying to ingest more logs so they can keep their price to a kind of like a steady stream. However, we see that we're losing that visibility. We're losing the chance of being able to grab possibly more threats. So with our customers, although we charge per user, we encourage as many integrations as you can for your environment so we can pull as much data as we can. So the more data we are able to pull, the higher chance of us being able to detect something. And that's the sort of value we're able to provide for our partners.
And it has predictability. If I'm a partner, I don't really feel like I have a direct control of how much data is ingested, right? If I just send a log source, then there's some spike in data. It's likely not because of anything I did. It just kind of happened. And if I am able to get a real cost on that per user when I'm working on my own pricing models and how I'm going to resell this to my clients, I'm able to control my costs much better and add a predictability level to that. So you mentioned P2 licensing, and I'm thinking I'm an MSP, and many of my clients, and even much of my own internal licensing, is Business Premium, which is Azure AD P1. And so I just want to clarify: is it that I need to have P2 for the SIM integration to work at all, or is it just that there are more capabilities that get unlocked and opened if I have P2, but it'll still get whatever it can get based on what licensing you have?
So that is correct. So if you have a P1 license, we will not prevent you from utilizing the SIEM. You can still be able to use as much as the SIEM can offer for that particular license. However, we understand that you'll be very limited to the certain type of rules that you could be able to create and collect as well. So we always recommend that customers have a minimum of P2. However, it does not stop the functionality of the SIEM.
So when we're talking about detections, does SIM do anomaly detection? So let's say, for example, one of my employees all of a sudden downloads 10,000 documents at 3 in the morning, and usually he downloads two things, or he starts going to all sorts of different SharePoint sites or different folders. Would that kind of strange or anomalous behavior get detected and alerted on?
So we have rules that are actually built out looking for compromises associated with threats or insider threats as well. So the CRU team will ensure that these are actionable rules. If you know, when you have a look at our collections, you can download and install this ConnectWise CRU collections, which is effectively all different kind of rules that we are looking for. And within those rules are going to be things looking for anomaly detections. So if there is anything that looks suspicious or an indicator of compromise, then we would be able to identify that based on the rules that we have. So you can also be able to specify event notifications. So let's say, for example, I'm an MSP that wants to go ahead and make sure that nobody using Office 365 can download more than 30 documents within SharePoint within a 12-hour period. Okay, so I can set a specific event notification as well if I wanted to, along with the anomaly detection. So we're very flexible with what we can do with the SIEM, either by static or dynamic.
We talked about Elastic a little bit before, and I just want to talk about other log sources. So, for example, I had a pretty complex Logstash pipeline. And if you're not familiar with Logstash, that's just a way to get log data into the SIM and does some manipulation before getting it into something like an Elastic database, which is, if you're not familiar with the entire Elastic ecosystem, it's simply just a different kind of database. Just think like database, and that's basically what it is. Um, am I able to send things like my custom pipeline data to it? Or in an even simpler way, if I have other applications that don't have an integration, can I send the log data from them to SIM, or am I limited to what has pre built integrations?
So I guess you're talking about arbitrary logs, right? So I guess at that stage, we do have log passes. So it's not limited to integrations, not at all. We can be able to create log passes so we can make sense of raw logs effectively. So without a log passer, we can adjust logs, but they won't really be very useful as we won't have rules for them. So we also have a generic log passer as well for those kind of very unique particular types of logs. So something which is something we need to push via syslog that
Mhm.
is not kind of related to a particular firewall, let's say like a vendor known such as Palo Alto or Fortinet. So we could be able to use a generic log pass in order for us to be able to ingest those logs, make sense of those logs, and apply rules based on them as well. So we have a very broad range of what we can be able to collect. So we are not limited to only integrations. We're not limited to local infrastructure. This can be random types of logs. And with that, we have a large list of log passes. And again, if we can't find our vendor that we need to match for, we have a generic log passer in order to make sense of those logs, in order for your team or the MSP or the SOC to create rules based on that as well.
So we talked before about some of the differences or some of the way that EDR, MDR, and SIM work together. Can you solidify that for the audience? And what I mean is, what types of things would I expect to see come from the EDR system as far as data, and what would I expect to see coming from the SIM as far as data? Like what does one look for versus the other?
That's a great question. So let's start with the EDR platforms. So the EDR is going to be your endpoint detection response. It's going to be looking or analyzing consistently for abnormal behavior, right? It's going to be looking for, let's say, for example, a Word document that's been opened up, and we'll double click on a macro. And for some reason, that Word document is now making configuration changes on the PowerShell. That's the sort of stuff from an EDI is what it's going to be looking for. It's going to be looking for something that, hey, that Word document should not be looking at or touching the PowerShell. Here's my list of things that a Word document can do. It's just gone outside that list. I'm going to flag that as an alert. Okay. That's great for behavior analysis, along with the typical kind of signatures that antivirus would be looking for as well. So think of your EDR as like an antivirus on steroids. Okay, so it's adding on that behavior analysis. Now, it's also going to be looking for things like fileless attacks. So malware, which is actually residing on the memory. It's great at preventing zero-day attacks as well. And again, zero-day attacks is something that's brand new, something that doesn't actually have a signature. And the way to prevent zero-day attacks is going to be things like behavior analysis. And this is something that an antivirus can't be able to prevent. Now, with a SIEM, we're going to be looking at anomalies. We're going to be looking at things that lead up to an attack, right? Has my Microsoft account gone ahead and logged into a location which is against policy? Has my Microsoft account gone ahead and failed 3 times with a particular login attempt? So we have authentication logs, we have endpoint event-based logs as well. So, and I had this recent conversation with one of my clients yesterday, where from the ground up, you would start with the EDR and you would layer that with layer defense with your SIEM. So SIEM has a much more broader visibility of what an EDR solution can have because of the different locations it can put its hands on, for example. So with SIEM, we do ingest more logs because of the areas we cover. However, they both complement each other extremely well, and especially with our EDR platforms, we have integrations to our SIEM as well. So we're collecting those events directly to our SIEM into a true centralized location.
So being ConnectWise, we have a lot of products ourselves in addition to our SIM product. And one of the things that I'm assuming is an advantage there is that do we have unique visibility into data from our other products? Does that give us a leg up as far as being able to look at audit information from what they do and ingest logs from them and being able to better understand that compared to other vendors? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's say, for example, Splunk, right? They don't have better visibility to our own products than ConnectWise SIEM because it's an in-house product, right? It's something that ConnectWise have owned and developed over the years. So let's say, for example, with ConnectWise Control or Automate, that we're seeing something unusual, right? So we have the capability of going to our internal teams and reaching out to product management and kind of informing them about this much more quicker than other competitors as well. And this actually prevents the end users having to report this as well, because it's something that we could be able to detect earlier. So we have health data that we'll be able to collect and be able to start reporting based on that as well. We'll be able to help our end customers kind of move towards the right direction with product and working towards a quicker resolution compared to other vendors.
So you can do the metaphorical yell down the hall for the guy who actually wrote the thing, as opposed to having to put in a system request. Although I guess these days it's a Teams message or phone call.
That's right. Just as simple as that nowadays.
So the last thing I want to ask is over the past couple weeks, we've introduced our Chuck character. He came up at IT Nation Secure. He's a technical person, service manager type who's very good at IT and is on his security journey, learning how to add security skills to just his technical skills. And so I asked this in videos that I record. If you could give Chuck, someone who's competent and smart in IT, learning how to do security, if you could give him a piece of advice related to what we're talked about today to help him improve his security awareness and security skills, what would that be? What should he be looking at or thinking about to get better?
So a majority of my customers are aligning to some sort of cybersecurity framework, right? That could be, for example, the NIST cybersecurity framework. That could be Cyber Essentials as well. But a majority of our customers follow the NIST, along with our own products as well. So with NIST, we have identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So it's a cycle at the end of the day, and any organization can be able to adopt this. So with identify, we identify our threats, right? We identify our assets, should I say? We identify what's important, right? What's worth protecting. And then from there, we actually go ahead and add that protection layer, right? So this is going to be our solutions. What are we using to make sure that we can go ahead and protect our assets or anything that's worth protecting from malicious threats. And then we have detect. So once we add our protection level, we want to continue that detection from a high standard. This is where the SIEM will be able to start playing well in. Okay, we're going to make sure that we are maintaining a decent detection level from all aspects of our network. And then from there, how are we going to respond? And detect and respond is where the SOC team is going to be lying very well from the EDR side of things. Of course, because SIEM is a detection tool, that's where the SOC will be relying on that element. And then finally, we have recover. Once an incident has occurred, if it does occur, how are we going to make sure we recover and have our business continuity plan be effective? How are we going to resume business operations? So that life cycle is imperative for any organization because anyone can be able to utilize and adopt. And then from there, we have different kind of risks, right? We have risk transfer, we have risk mitigation, avoidance, as well as acceptance as well. So risk transfer, that's effectively going to be your cyber insurance. Have you got something that you need to go ahead and have a third party to resume that risk, to remove that risk from your organization? Do you have a meaning to mitigate risk? So mitigate would be going ahead and applying all the different solutions to reduce that risk as much as possible, right? And as we know in cybersecurity, we can't reduce risk 100%. There's always some element of risk. And we have risk avoidance. So let's say, for example, you have a particular server or application that does pose a risk. However, the risk is way too high than what the service is actually offering. So we can remove that application. So we've completely avoided the risk. And finally, we have risk acceptance as well. So risk acceptance is meaning that we've identified the risk. The value is extremely higher than what the risk is. So we've just accepted that there is some element of a risk there. So I believe Chuck should be kind of adopting those kind of things and implementing that within the network. And that would definitely help his security posture in the long run.
I love it. And Chuck, noticed that Sasha did not mention risk ignore as one of the options. That's something that we see far too often, and it's just not an option. If you become aware of a risk, you can do one of the things that Sasha said. What you can't do is sweep it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. I guess that's essentially risk acceptance, but the idea is when you accept a risk to formally say, okay, I'm aware of the possible consequences and deciding to do it anyway and make an informed decision. Just kind of ignoring it and hoping it doesn't happen. That may work out in the short term, but really is not the right way to go.